What we're going to be doing today is putting a finish on one of my Wootz blades here. Now, I think I use a slightly different finishing technique than most folks for the etch. And I have sold Wootz bars to lots of people, tried to describe the system, and not always with great success. So maybe this video will help. So what I've got my Wootz blade. It's somewhere between sort of a 400 and 800 grit hand sanded finish. I did a good 400 grit finish and then went over that with 800, but not religiously. I haven't really washed this or anything after the sanding. In that final sanding I was using Windex as the lubricant, so should be pretty clean. Now the acid is really the key part here. So this is oxalic acid, which you can buy as wood bleach at a lot of lumber or hardware stores. Sometimes you have to dig around for it. It comes as crystals generally, so in a powdered form. Add that to water. I generally just add, mix until there's just it's consistently leaving crystals on the bottom of the container. And you might see I've got floating in here. Well, it's gone now, but I had a piece of very fine steel wool. And what that steel wool does, you want to add steel wool until it stops dissolving. Basically what we're trying to do is saturate the acid with iron. And that greatly changes the action. If you just use oxalic by itself, it can be really hard to achieve a good finish. But using the saturated oxalic goes pretty well. My other, super high-tech implement here is some felt. Just felt from a craft store. So all I'm going to do is start wiping the acid, dropping my tools, wiping the acid on the blade, trying to make sure that I'm keeping pretty good coverage. Now, one thing that is added to this oxalic is a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit of rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol. And one of the most common etches in metallography is nitol, or I think that's how it's pronounced, N-I-T-A-L. It's nitric acid of a very specific strength with some alcohol added to it. Why? That's for a chemist. I don't really know, but I do find that having, for this rubbed-on finish, having the alcohol in there helps prevent, sort of like weird sharp edges to the etch. Because as you can see, as I'm going along, it'll kind of flow on there a little bit, and I'll have thick spots, thin spots, bubbles, all kinds of good stuff. And all of those could lead to uneven etch. So now, you probably can't see it yet, but I'm starting to see the pattern appear. And my guess is the camera was not going to refocus for us. And you'll see, I haven't actually put new acid on here yet. I did a little bit at the beginning, and pretty much have just gone with that. And now, as I'm starting to see things appear, now I'm going to add just a little bit more, a little fresh. And again, trying to make sure I spread this nice and evenly on the surface. I am applying a little bit of pressure, a little scrubbing action here. Sometimes if I find there's a spot that doesn't want to etch, I can scrub at it a little bit with the felt, and that'll help. There's one thing about this process that is different. The fact that I am wiping this acid on versus dipping into the acid. That's what we normally do, and we etch, and you get a very different action working this way because you have exposure to the atmosphere, a huge amount of exposure to the atmosphere, and that changes the process. Again, you want to know why? Talk to a chemist. I assume it has to do with how much oxygen is available. Sometimes if you're etching a blade in ferric chloride, so you have a dipped etch or an immersed etch, sometimes right at the transition, that line where the etch begins, where the ferric chloride comes up to, sometimes that line will etch deeper and darker than anywhere else. And I think that's a similar effect where there's more oxygen available. So hopefully the camera is picking up that I'm really starting to get some nice pattern here. It's not perfect yet, but we're definitely headed in the right direction. And what I'm going to do is pretty much continue. Now, if I'm working on a longer blade, I will often, rather than working one side at a time, use my piece of felt on both sides. And it is key to make sure you get up to the tip. Again, a little scrubbing action. So I'm definitely getting some pretty good pattern at this point. It's starting to come in nicely, even in the areas that were resisting at first. And again, I really don't know whether the pattern's going to show well on the camera at this point. But what I'm going to do is, now that I've got a pretty good etch started, by the way, don't do this when your thumb muscles are already tired, because this hand's just got a grip. Can lead to some cramping. But now that I've got a pretty good etch started, what I'm going to do is we're going to set the felt aside for just a moment. And I have some 1200 grip paper here, and I'm going to just go over this quickly. I'm not necessarily, you see, first I don't actually take the acid off. If I neutralized this, there'd be a greater chance that I would get some rust, which I don't want. And really I'm just going through trying to scuff it all a little bit. This is not like etching on a pattern welded blade where I have a really deep etch. You don't generally get a deep etch on Wootz. So I'm not trying to polish back the high portion here. This is more just scrubbing through a little bit. I've found that it helps to get rid of any unevenness, or most unevenness, in the pattern or in the etch. So one side, the other side, I'll often quickly go back to that first side because it's often dried out and done some funny stuff by now. You can, if you find that the blade is drying out, you can actually dip your sandpaper right in the acid. Go over it a little bit. Now again, I don't know whether the camera's going to pick this up. I can still see the pattern. I haven't erased it by any means, but just trying to even things out a little bit if they have gone slightly funky. That was all I'm going to do with that. Back to my oxalic. Now that I've already got the etching action established, this new etch, approaching it again, it comes up a lot faster. Generally, much more evenly. If there is a spot that's being funny, you can give it a little bit more scrubbing action. That sometimes helps. Essentially, what I'm watching for here is that I kind of reach a point of diminishing returns that I've got. So again, don't know whether this is going to show at all, but I've got a pretty nice pattern going in here throughout. Maybe a little bit more work to do out at the tip. Try not to puncture myself. So I'm going to keep going over this a bit longer, but I'm definitely getting close to the end of what I'm going to achieve. What I do want to make sure of is that I've gotten a dark enough finish. Now, the way that Wootz will generally etch is that areas that are hardened and tempered will etch darker. So if you have a differentially heat-treated blade, you're going to get some, you'll have a little bit of difficulty achieving a good visible pattern throughout. But this etch will achieve it. You can look on Instagram. I have done some differentially hardened blades. You can see the hamon in those. It is masked a bit by the carbide banding in here. The carbide banding is, chemically speaking, a greater difference than, from the steel. It's more different from the steel than the hardened steel is from the unhardened steel. Acids typically function based on how different your materials are. So if you have a greater difference and a lesser difference, well, the greater difference is going to be what gets brought out in most cases. Different acids do function in different ways, but for the most part, that's how it works. Another factor that can come into play here is how much carbon you have put into solution. So if you've heat treated this and you either soaked it too long at temperature, or maybe your quench temperature was just too hot, you might have put enough carbon into solution that your pattern will be largely erased. It'll be there kind of, but it'll be very hard to bring out. And it will be especially hard to bring out if that's only, say, along the edge, and the rest still has good intact banding. In that case, my suggestion is that you go back and reheat treat. Do a few thermal cycles first, just above and below critical. That'll reform your banding and quench from a lower temperature. The Wootz typically, if you're following a relatively traditional formula, the Wootz will harden from 1400 degrees Fahrenheit quite readily. So I've really achieved just about the maximum that I think I'm going to get on this. So I'm just kind of working that tip a little bit more, making sure I've got as even a finish as I can. Now, the other thing that can throw things off is decarburization, because the pattern is based on basically the carbon content, so therefore the carbide content. Areas of decarb show up pretty blatantly. Where on a, say, a pattern welded blade, if you've got decarb, it generally shows up as a pale area. On Wootz, it actually shows up as a very dark blotch, and that's because you don't have the carbide banding in there. So you've got to still have a very high carbon steel. Most of the decarb is not completely devoid of carbon, it's just much lower in carbon. And those areas will just simply not show pattern. They will show as being very dark, but they will not show pattern. You're most likely to get those along your edges, which I think I may have a little bit of that going on here right along my cutting edge, but it's also hard to tell because it's hard to scrub right along the cutting edge. We might be able to see better after the next step. So what I'm going to do next is just quickly rinse this in cold water and then dry it. I actually, if possible, I leave it in the sun a little bit so that it's really dry, so any sort of microscopic moisture has had the opportunity to evaporate. And then I will wax it with Johnson's paste wax, and then I will do what I call a dry buff, which is I use a loose sewn clean buffing wheel and buff that wax. Now, because I'm being secretive, not with my process, but with my tooling and location and whatnot, on account of the fact I got robbed a couple months back, so I've been much more secretive on Instagram and elsewhere. I'm not going to show that part of the process, just because I don't, if folks are out there still watching thinking, ooh, wouldn't it be fun to rob Mr. Peter Burt, take his knives, take his equipment, I don't really want them to know in advance what everything looks like. So, in any case, like I said, I'm going to rinse this, dry it, get it as dry as possible with, if you've got a heat gun, that's a great way to go. I don't have a heat gun here. Thieves be warned. You won't get a heat gun if you break in. But making sure it's very dry before the wax goes on. Let that wax, sort of dry on the surface a little bit, and then buff it. So I'll be back to show the results of that in just a minute. But hopefully, again, I really don't know what that camera is going to be doing. Hopefully, it's picking up on this pattern a little bit. So one thing I do want to note is the fact that I'm not going to say the surface is dull before the waxing and buffing, but it's not a super shiny surface. There's not a crazy luster to this. It looks good, but you'll see the change here in a minute. So now you can see much higher luster on the blade because of that very reflective surface. It can be difficult to capture the pattern in video or pictures for that matter. It's all about the right angle, but you get a pretty good sense of what that surface looks like with that just waxed and buffed finish on there. So yeah, that's basically the process, and hope it works for you.